Hello everyone, I welcome you all for the final day of Integrate 2019. The first session is going to be from Samuel Kastberg. Samuel works at Microsoft as a senior program field engineer. He works with development and operations of BizTalk Server Solutions since 2004. With the new version of BizTalk Server around the corner, everyone would be planning to upgrade the service. Samuel here will be talking about automating the installation of BizTalk servers through versus scripts.
So, good morning. I see that blue t-shirts trend since yesterday. So thank you for having me. We're going to talk about scripting and BizTalk Server Installation. After talking so much cloud, I really like cloud, I thought eventually renaming the session to meanwhile in your data center there could be something. You have my email address there. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. The worst thing that could happen is that I say I don't have time. This feels a little bit like being at the Integration User Group Sweden. We have a lot of Swedes here. Raise hands. Cool. Lovely. We talk more and more about infrastructure as code. I'm not saying that scripting an environment this way is infrastructure as code, but it's at least the way it's going there. And you could actually, depends on how much work you do, whether it could be that you create the configuration file and you have all the infrastructure to actually get everything in place. Eldert had pictures with food. I love food too. So this is about preparation. I worked as a cook like 1985, so it's a while ago. But one of the most important things was to actually prepare, to have things in place. So have a predictability in the things you perform. So because if you get a plate with a beef that is smaller than the one that ordered the same by your side, you get annoyed. With preparations, when doing installations, it's exactly the same. So we want predictability. We want each plate to be the same and be everything ready. We want streamlined installation. So if we have like a test environment, QA, prod, we want them to be the same. So we have the same features, so we have the same behavior. So we can repeat it over and over again. When you do manual installation, at least when I do them, I tend to do errors. Anyone with me? Yeah? Okay, a couple. A lot of perfect people here. And you want to lower cost because doing a complicated installation like a BizTalk installation it's complex, it takes a lot of time, so you want to do that. And scripting actually helps you to lower the time. With a customer in Sweden, Södra Skogsägarna, that we have done this, we actually created an entire environment with availability groups, the cluster BizTalk hosts, all the way in 2 hours. So from virtual machines, even including scripting the storage parts of it. So you can get very, very far. You don't save it on the first environment, but on the second and the third, you definitely do it. With Södra Skogsägarna, it was disaster recovery was one of the drivers for them to do this. They wanted, of course, the streamlined installations, but they also wanted to be prepared. We had another
disaster recovery plan that was sort of the first thing we would do, recovering databases and so on, depending on different scenarios. But they are prepared to recreate the entire environment and then deploy the applications, and they have them in place. So what should we script? Things you can control and things you want to be the same over and over again. And there are some good candidates. You have like the Windows features. If you're creating your environment in Azure, you need to take into account things like provisioning the VMs. You have a load balancer you need to create and so on. You can use ARM templates for that, but you need to do it, and scripting is definitely a good way to actually do the deployments there. You have the BizTalk features themselves, configuring SSO, the group, and so on. DTC settings, a lot of them. If you're developing or scripting for development machines, it could be Visual Studio. You can script that installation too. So there are a lot of things that you could do with that. And of course, eventually your favorite monitoring tool. So, bad candidates. Those are things that you can't control. Things that might change over time. So if you're going to do, think about it when you're setting up something, what will happen within 6 months or a year? Because that might be the time when you're going to use this. Will we have the same storage solution or not? Eventually, doing like we did with Södra Skogsägarna to doing the storage, mapping the loons and setting up that part, eventually was to overdo it a bit because they were changing storage solution after a while, and that could be, we had at least a discussion that, okay, there we have some things to work on. And then you have things that you are not able to do as BizTalk administrators. In the bright world, you have domain admin rights and can do anything. Generally, you don't. So try to find what you're able to do and what not to do. And things you can't control is definitely things that you shouldn't. So before you start, what is your goal? What are we going to do? An installation for a development machine will definitely look completely different than the one for creating an environment where you want to have highly available with SQL Server clustered BizTalk host, and so on. So you have to decide, what are we going to do? And then you have to set your baseline and document it. Where are we going from? So you know, I mean, if you have a description for a trip you're going to do, if you don't know if you're leaving from Gothenburg, where I live, or if you're going from Copenhagen, the description would be completely different. So you have to say, okay, this description is from Gothenburg. Then you know which path to go. And it could be something like, okay, we need 4 VMs with Windows Server 2016 or 2019 for BizTalk 2020. We need 6 loons with a certain space and so on. So document it. So you know next time you get back to the scripts and is going to install the environment again, then you know from where you're going. Then you can check the documentation to actually see that you have everything in place. Then time frame. I promise you, you can polish, and you can polish. So time frame, set aside a certain amount of time. How much is it worth? Okay, is it worth 3 days? Is it worth 5 days or 5 weeks? It depends on what you're going to do. Like with an authority in Sweden, we have created scripts to automate deployment, and they have installed like 20 different environments. They create one test environment for each project they have, just to avoid testing clashes. Then they have QA, and production is, of course, a common environment, but for ease. And they have saved a lot of time by doing this by script. I talked with them last week, and they are still very, very pleased with the solution. Scripting is not a replacement for documentation. The documentation will look different. Instead of having like 500 steps, open a book, read line 1, and so on. Now, installing it, so the descriptions would be, okay, execute script 1 that will perform these things. That is a good recommendation. Write what each script is going to do in your documentation, so you actually know what will happen when you're running something. And if it, for some reason, doesn't work, you actually know what you should do. Some good practices. Let your main code just orchestrate the process and create functions for different tasks. Here you see you have the main code, just calling install BizTalk, install adapter pack, install CU or feature pack, whatever you want. And you have the functions up, because then you can, the code becomes much cleaner. You see what each step is doing. And if you want to move around something for some reason, move them. It's easier to actually get it to fit in. Name the scripts in some way where you actually see also the order in which you are going to run them. Write modules for common functionality, like logging, if you have some kind of prompts, if you're running over and over the scripts, it have happened when you want eventually to ask, do you want to install SQL Server Management Studio? It takes like 15 minutes or something. And if you already have it in place, you want to avoid that. So I have some samples. So everything, all code I show here, you have samples in a GitHub. You see later on a link to that. So create a good module that you can load in every script for you. You will be generating files. It could be log files, some configuration files along the way. Name them with a common name, because you will do some cleanup along the afterwards, and then you identify them quite easy. I never thought I would say something like this, but be moderate with your error handling, because you can do a lot of error handling and spending a lot of time to handle errors that are not likely to happen when you're doing your installation. So try to find out, write more proactive code in that case, check if something is in place before, and eventually have a stop if you need to move a file or something. And debugging is a very good friend. So what I generally do when I run an installation, at least the first time, is that I step through it and I check. Do I have everything in place? Yes, no, okay, then I have I can move the files to the right location or stop the script and change. Add reminders in your code. Remember, this is not code you will be in all the time. It's code that you eventually will go to within 6 months or a year, or eventually never. Well, for the next version of BizTalk 2024 or something. And I do things like this, add just a link. This is a feature that was for Windows 2012 that disappeared for 2016, but you still need it for BizTalk. So you add a link like that, and it's quite easy. Then you don't need to search in your mailbox to find out where it was, or wherever you try to find things. Common issues I have run into. Wrong binaries. Anyone install wrong binaries? Yeah, some, yeah. It happens. Enterprise edition on a dev environment, a test environment could be expensive. That's not the big issue. You could sort of redo that whenever you want. But if you got developer edition into production environment, you're not allowed to do that, and you will need to do an installation of the product, just the binaries. So it's okay to do that change from developer to enterprise edition, but you still will need to take down your environment. So it's an issue, definitely. When you're creating cluster resources, your cluster, you have a name for the cluster, and that's an object in AD. That needs to have the rights to do some things when you're creating, like a listener for availability groups. And if you don't have the rights, it stops. So that is something you need to. So when you download the presentation, you have a link there. It describes what you should do in such an environment. You can prepare, you create the accounts beforehand and have them disabled, and then run, then it will work. Starting PowerShell, your session in 32 or 64-bit, depending on different modules you're using. You might need one or the other. This one, I have done it so many times until I did something. Not running elevated. The bad thing with this is that you get some things done and some not. And you generally want everything. So you have the requires run as administrator on top of this. That will prevent you from starting the script if you're not in an elevated session. So that is good. And then you could write small checks, like check 32-bit and check 64-bit, and stop the script. I generally have these two on all my script to check and stop before I do anything. And of course, I created them because I did wrong. Windows feature installations, you have different tools, you have different modules that you use, and it's a question of taste. Or eventually, if you have, actually one customer, I didn't even know about this until one customer called me and said, hey, the scripts we created, I tried to do it on my dev machine that is a Windows 10. It doesn't work. Okay? So you have the ones from the disk module will work with both Windows 10 and the server operating systems. You can install the module on Windows 10, but you will not be able to add the features to the Windows 10 machine anyway. Yeah, I'm here just a sample of actually enable Windows features. I try to enable the Donald Duck feature, and you see I have an error message proactively telling me. So, and it's actually quite good to do this way, because if you for some reason fail along the way, you can actually continue generally, and then you can install manually just that feature that you failed with. And just a sample using the other module. It's quite straightforward. The Windows feature, the BizTalk features. You could run a setup/add local and then a list of all the features. I prefer actually this one. You can export a configuration file. Anyone done that? Yeah? You can run configuration.exe and you can export there. In the bottom of that file, you actually have a list of all the features you selected for that environment. So if you have today a 2013 environment, you're going to install a 2016 or 2020 when it comes, you can actually use those features. Between 2013 and 2016, some features disappeared, so you will need to sort of eventually remove them from the file. I have in the blog posts I've written about this. You have a list of the feature. I exported them from the MSI files from Orca. Installing the features, it's quite straightforward. It's actually just running setup.exe. Sending, you have some paths you actually need. Where is setup? Strange. The cab file, you should generally download. It depends a little bit if you have internet access from the servers or not. I generally download it and have it together. So generally we create a folder on the network where you put everything, because then when you're going to install on another service, you just download it from there. You could even have it in the scripts to download everything from the network. Yeah, so quite straightforward doing the installation itself, and it goes fast. More things you can do: install CU and feature packs, and the adapter pack. Adapter pack is a bit more complex. It's just more. With adapter pack, you need the SDK, and you need the features themselves, and you have 32 and 64-bit. So eventually you get up with 4 installations. And the features you have a list, like SQL feature will be WCF SQL, and the DB feature is the Oracle, and then you could add, and you could write all, then you get everything. It depends on what you want, and you have in the samples, you have a link to where you actually can read in the documentation what features you actually have if you want to be selective. CU some feature packs is quite straightforward. Just send some parameters, like in this case quite S and W, that will say, okay, this is silent installation and I don't want to see the wizard, and don't restart. And I send also, like you see, the log, a path to a log file, and that is, I would say, quite a good practice. So you have one location where you place your log file, so you can read if something goes wrong. You can actually read there quite easily, and don't need to look them up in some temp library. The configuration file is something that you will have a configuration file to configure the environment. And each configure file consists of feature elements. Each feature element maps to a section that you have in the configuration.exe. So here you have the ones. And the feature, or each question, I would say, contains answers, and one of them will be selected true with an attribute selected true, and that will be the one that is active. So you can export your from configuration exe, you can replace the values from the machine where you actually created this template and replace them with placeholders that you will, at configuration time, change them to the values for the environment you're going to use. And you will need at least 2 files, one to create the group and one to join the group. Here we have a sample of such a file where I have replaced there with some tokens, placeholders that I will, and even you see that I have the SSO user accounts password there that I will get back to you how to handle that. And I even found a bug while after taking my screenshot. I forgot to change one. So have someone else to review your work. So when configuring the group, I take 3 files. So I have one, the template file that we looked at now. I have one file that is just the CSV file where I have the tokens and I have the values and an explanation of what it is. And I replace them. And then I have a secret file, my secret settings, things that I don't want to be out there. And I generally use KeyPass. I try to. It's because there is a good PowerShell module to use that. So then you actually don't need to have your passwords. I've seen a lot of TXT files and CSVs and other things with passwords. I take these 3 files and generate one config file that will contain passwords. And you use that to run configuration exe, and 5 minutes later you have a fully configured group. It's quite nice. Remember, there are passwords there, so delete them. So you have here, just start the configuration. I said even here, a path to a log file, and this one is definitely something that I have used a lot of times, the log file, to find out what I have done wrong. Once again, delete. More things you can do, the jobs. Anyone forgotten to configure the DTA purge? Yeah, we have some. You can do this. You can actually do the same with the backup job. So you could actually have in your, either in your secrets file or in your configuration file, you could actually have a placeholder for where you're going to have your backups, and then you can configure this. So it's quite neat to do it that way. And you remember, I've seen a lot of environments where I can see quite quickly if they have forgotten to do that. For a while, because the databases, if you run a BizTalk environment and don't do the DTA purge or take backups for a couple of weeks, the databases grow. And here you have one setting, the max connection settings. So if you're communicating with calling web services of different services, you want to regulate how many connections you actually could have. And this is just, it's more a sample. Hey, you can edit your configuration files with script. So it's one idea of things you can do. You can configure hosts and instances. So with this, you can use WMI. Anyone loves that? Sometimes. You use these classes, or I prefer the PowerShell provider that I use to register as one of the first things I do. One thing, many use the PowerShell provider, Yeah? Some people? One of the things when you're creating things with it, I don't know, I've used a lot of PowerShell providers, but I have never needed to actually move to the location where I'm going to create an object. But with this one, I need to do it. I don't know why, but if you know it, it's not an issue. And here we see some sample code where I create a host, and what I generally do is that I try to get the host. If it's not there, I create it. And the same with the instance. And you see that it's just, I do a push location to get to the right location, then create the object itself. If you write it this way, to actually try to get it, then you can actually run the script over and over again without failing. So if you have a configuration file with all the hosts that you want to have, and you run them, and yes, you will get a lot. You already have this, but it will not fail. Handlers, WMI also, or the PowerShell provider. Even here, you need to have a new item. Here, this one is, I don't know why, but sometimes you get, both when you're trying to get the handlers and when you're trying to create them, you can get some DTC failures. So just handle them with your error handling code. So you do retries to get them in place. And it's quite straightforward also to navigate to the right location and do a new item. So, handling secrets. Keep them safe. You could use KeyPass, you could use Key Vault. If you have internet access, you can actually have a Key Vault in Azure. There is an API. You can even have PowerShell commandlets you could use to access them. And then you get your secret. I run into quite often environments where the BizTalk servers don't have internet access. And then I prefer to use KeyPass for that reason, because the module, I could sort of take the module there and install it and use it. So that's why I prefer that. Once again, remember to delete the configuration file. Here we have a function that I wrote to resolve the secret. So I have I first load the configuration file with my tokens, and the values of some of those tokens starts with the $, and then I sort of know that this is a path to my KeyPass database. So then I can change the value with write one. And here you see get KeyPass entry. I have entered just one password, the one for the KeyPass database, and I transform the secure password to clear text. And with that, a little sample of the script in action. This is quite boring. So I have edited to be a bit faster. Here you see an exported file. So I have a script to export the settings. I go in and edit it to change. So I have the path in the KeyPass database. And then when I run the script, I already have the tracking host there. So we see that I will get some yellow text telling me, hey, I already found this one. Then it's this, I think it's the send handler, send host that it creates. Now we have created that. I created the instance and handlers for them. So you see that. And you can just use the script that I have and sort of extend it if you want to have more settings that you want to bring. You could add things like the throttling values if you have something in one environment and would want to bring them on. There are some other ways to do this. You could even use this. You have the migration tool from MSIT. That is also, could also do this, so you can actually export from one environment and do that, but that wouldn't be the right way. No, I'm kidding. So, and here we see I also included in the script to do the receive intervals, and then we come to a lot of hosts that are already, both hosts and handlers that I already have. And it should be done. This is quite boring. I actually had another demo of the configuration, and I sort of got it down to 2 minutes, but it was so boring, so I left it out. Come on. There, done. The thing with this, handling this way, is that you can actually run this over and over again and get the host there in place. Just add new lines with a new host, you run the script again, and you get it there, and then you can run them on different environments and get everything in place. With this script, you use the keep as database, so you never have any password ever out. So that's a good way to do it. I have written 4 blog posts about all these topics. So you have them skastbergwordpress.com. And I have a GitHub repository with these scripts and some other things that I like. Feel free to use it. It's play around. If you find any errors, please enter issues in GitHub or reach out to me. I want them to be working perfectly. But I have found some myself. So it's good if you reach out to me. And with that, I think it's time for Sandro. He's listening to music. So thank you for me.
Covey.co